Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of Dojo Live. Today is Thursday, January 20th, 2022. I'm Tulio Sergusa, broadcasting from Southern California. Joining me is Kim Lantis in Hermosillo, Mexico. Hi, Kim. Welcome back. I just love that new song that we start out the show with. I forget almost that we have to host a show. I get into this whole mood of dancing. But anyway, I hope you guys are enjoying it too. We have Laurence Cooke, who is the founder and CEO at Nanopay, joining us today from very, very cold Canada. Hi, welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we're going to talk about banks today, particularly small banks, and it's an interesting topic that you've chosen for today. But before we go into the topic and dive in and see what we can learn, see what we can unpack today, let's get to know you a little bit. Laurence, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll talk about Nanopay as well. Welcome to the show again.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I'm Laurence. I like to say I'm irresponsible for Nanopay, rather than responsible for. I started my life and career in South Africa, which is where I grew up and did my undergrad. I then moved to the UK, and in the UK I did an MBA, and I met my wife, and we had some kids, and eventually she stole the kids and moved back to Canada, where she's from. So I had to follow to see my kids. We're still together, so I jest. She just didn't consult me about moving to this freezing, frozen tundra and that. But I've spent most of my career in telecom. I've always been a technical guy, although I've never worked in the technical space. I like to work on the edge of technology, and understand the economics and business side of things. And so, I moved from telecom into the payment space about in 2013. After I wanted to start a payments business, and the telco that I was working at wasn't interested in that space. I said, it's going to be bigger than wireless, and they're like, no way. And so I started my own gig. And really at the start of Nanopay, what I wanted to do is just create something fundamentally different. And so what I wanted to do was create what's now called central bank digital currency, which is really digitizing fiat money.
Awesome. Okay. Great to meet you. It's interesting. Background from telecom, spent the first 9 years of my career in telecom, and always felt they had micropayments down. They could have easily pivoted into more payment solutions, banking solutions, but most of them missed the boat on that. So it's good to hear that someone here saw an opportunity. Tell us a little bit about Nanopay. What's the company all about? What gave birth to this idea? Share with us what the company's all about, please.
Yeah, I mean, following on from your thought process there, I thought if we just take a prepaid billing system and deploy that as a payment system, it's really better than every other payment system in the world. So taking some of that telco thinking, taking the stability and availability of telco, which just always works, the ease of use of using a mobile phone versus the ease of use of using payment technologies. There were just so many obvious transitions from telco to payments. But at the heart of this, I wanted to do two things. Firstly, I wanted to digitize cash, and create the central bank digital currency. And by doing so, really transform the entire payments ecosystem. And, we started this company at the same time as the earliest cryptocurrencies were taking off. And I was like, am I going to get into a cryptocurrency world, or am I going to build the digital equivalent of fiat currencies? And I chose the latter. So that was the first thing. And the second thing is, when you look across the globe, there are lots of movements of money, both domestic and internationally. But the absurd thing is the poorest people always pay the most as a share of their payments. And I just think that's patently not right. So, if we can really digitize fiat money, we can level the playing field and right that wrong. So those are the two tenets under which we started Nanopay.
Love it. I was thinking as I'm listening, we should connect VaroBank with you guys. They should work together.
That is exactly what I was thinking. I was like, wow, there's a lot of similarities.
We had the CTO there who was telling his story about being an immigrant. And I was like, this is exactly what it's all about. Helping those who need it the most have access to the money. So let's dig in. Let's see what we can learn today from the topic and the question that you've posed. And we look forward to unpacking it all. Kim, if you could please introduce the topic and kick it off, that'd be great.
I hope so. Zoe finally went away, so I think it'll be okay. So today's topic is chosen by you, Laurence, is new customers, a fierce competition between large and small banks. And what we're looking to answer is why small banks need to be buying and not building solutions so they can shift to focus delivering customer value that will drive net new revenue. So, Laurence, my question to get us started off today is why? Why this topic, this juxtaposition between large and small banks?
Yeah, there are a few things. I think the first thing is all of the regulations and all of the constructs, including how much capital you need, how many deposits you can take. All of this is designed for really large financial institutions. And when we went through the financial crisis, all of the regulators doubled down on making it, pretty difficult for the big banks to fail. But what they inadvertently did is they made it almost impossible for the smaller banks to be able to compete, to be sustainable and to grow. And the vast majority of people actually bank with smaller banks rather than the biggest banks. And almost every person who is really successful, or every small business that's successful, outgrows their bank. And they outgrow their bank when they need to do cross-border payments, or when they need to do basic cash or treasury management, or they need new products and features. And it's absurd that the very banks that support our growing small businesses and support us in the beginning of our careers, we all outgrow, and then we move on to bigger banks. And the bigger banks never treat us well, right? They never actually have products and services that are focused on what we need and what we do. So, we land up in that beautiful space when you're a small business, or whether a budding entrepreneur, or a successful person, even in a corporate. You get to a point where you are in the sweet spot of being overcharged and underserved. So it's just this most absurd gray area. And no big bank can solve the problems of these guys because there's just too many of them, and it's, they can't make enough money out of them. And no small bank can step up and do that. So, I think that's the market conditions around this. I think the second thing is that all of the legacy banks, and all banks are effectively legacy, except new banks like Barrow and that. All the legacy banks have so much technical infrastructure that's designed around batch payments and batch systems, and they spend 80% of their funds on just keeping the lights on, and they can never convert that into this new modern tech. And that means it's impossible to actually serve those guys, even if they wanted to. The third thing is that with all the changes in all the ecosystems, the acquisition cost of a customer is going up. And it's going up for fintechs, and it's going up for the smaller banks. And now only the big banks can actually afford to take on all of the new customers. And that's creating a market dynamic, which makes it impossible for the smaller banks to be successful in the long run.
Before we move on to the complication of that, can we talk a little bit about why it's important for smaller banks to survive? Like, why? We had a show a couple weeks back, maybe months now. Time goes so fast. Nate, which it was about e-commerce and his idea of wanting to support small e-commerce businesses because, Amazon and I can't remember what's the one out of India. But
Alibaba.
Thank you. Taking over, everything. And so I hear the same message with banks. So why is it important for small banks to survive?
Well, so, small banks have always grown, and they have direct relationships with their customers. So they'll actually know you, and they'll build a relationship. And, big banks can do that too, but they can only do that with really big companies and really, very wealthy individuals. So, big banks have that capability to do it for their wealth management clients, but not the other 90% or 99% maybe. Smaller banks are, they employ a lot of people. They support all their local communities. They're really focused on their local community. So, if it's in a rural agricultural place, they will know a lot about supporting agricultural businesses. So they've got nuance and understanding and market conditions, and they live and breathe in the same market condition as all of their clients. when you're a big global bank and you can make money no matter what's going on in the local economy, then how do you support your local guys? How do you know when to, get in there and roll up your sleeves and take a bit of risk in supporting them? But when you a small or regional bank, you're in it with your customers. You're all in it together, and their success is your success. And that's why I don't like this decoupling of that relationship. When you get to, it's absurd that as soon as you get to a level of success, whether you're an individual or a small business, that you break that relationship. That should be a time that you're rewarding that bank for helping you through the tough times, through helping you through that growth. And it's kind of that community that you don't get with the big mega banks and the money center banks and the global banks.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about how much of it is the challenge of the smaller bank not having the product lines to keep up with the demand of the growing customers, who are then forced to essentially go to a bigger bank to get their needs met, versus the risks associated with serving larger scope clients. What's the balance between these two? Is it predominantly a lack of capability, or is it also just a lack of desire because there's a higher risk in serving larger scope clients? Which of the two seems to be the primary reason, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think to be honest, there's very little risk in serving the clients that you already know and you already know everything about and you already have a good relationship with, and adding another product or feature to that same client that you know so much about. In fact, there's much more risk in delivering a new product to clients that you don't know, which is what the bigger banks are doing. But the bigger banks have degrees of freedom, and they can afford to fail many times over and still get it right in the long run. And they can, fail fast and keep doing it. Smaller banks don't have the resources to go out and build out a new software platform and then fail, or not be as good as something that someone else has provided, and therefore not get the customers. So there's no return on the investment. So we're not talking about taking crazy risk in your lending space or anything like that. In fact, they've taken the risk when those businesses were small, when those individuals were starting out in their career, when they gave them a mortgage when they didn't know how they're going to pay it in the future. Now that they've paid off their mortgage and their business has grown, and they're no longer net borrowers, they are cash flow positive, there's a lot less risk. So those are actually the clients that you want to hold on to, because now it's the time to return the favor.
So, okay, so I'm a small bank. My customers are basically outgrowing me in my capacity to serve their needs. Building solutions to serve their needs, it's cost prohibitive. There's just too many challenges around that. Plus, if I fail at it, I can't, reiterate again. I can't pivot. There's no money, and there's not enough to support that kind of innovation. What are you proposing? How do they solve this dilemma?
Yeah, so let's look at a good example in the United States, where the banks were faced with this very problem. And the example is in real-time payments, or in faster payments. So the Federal Reserve set up a committee, and we had lots of small banks and big banks and fintechs and all the consultants on the planet all in the room at the same time. And some 450 people got together for a few years in a row on many meetings, some virtual, some in person, to really hash out what the United States needed in terms of real-time payments. And then they said, okay, these are the preconditions you need to be able to deliver this from a technology point of view, from an ecosystem point of view. And then, the clearinghouse, which is owned by, the 10 biggest banks, came out and delivered real-time payments, which is perfect for all of the big banks. And all the big banks could afford the interconnection and the technology and the resources that they needed. But then when it came to the smaller banks, it was too expensive and it took too long, and you couldn't actually offer the services that the big banks could offer. So, they went back to the Fed and they said, we need your help. And what the Fed did is they said, okay, well, this is effectively market failure, because the clearinghouse can't provide to the market, to all the smaller banks, what they need. So we're going to create our own thing. And so they've created FedNow, which is the equivalent of real-time payments delivered by the Fed to all of the smaller banks. And I think in the fullness of time, all the fintechs will eventually be able to connect into that as well. And so they've leveled the playing field and they've created an interconnect to do that. But not every problem is a big enough problem for the Fed to step in and say, we're going to do something to make this possible. And, so some of these problems are big enough that it could lead to failure or, a much smaller local banks, but not big enough for the Fed or some other authority, government agency or utility to step in and provide.
So I'm guessing enter Nanopay. How is it that you're helping to fill that gap?
Yeah, so we haven't discriminated in any of our products between large banks and small banks. We've built our solutions so they can be used equally as easily from small banks to big banks. We have a couple in market right now, and that would include cross-border payments. And in the cross-border payments, we design our product so that it gives you a Wise or TransferWise like experience. But we can deliver that using a bank's brand and a bank's existing customers. So they don't have to try and build the software that's going to be as good as TransferWise, because we've already done that, right? So they can use our tech and deliver that. And we deliver it in effectively a risk-free model where we do revenue share. So their success is our success. The cost of entry is very, very low. And on the one extreme, to the smallest banks and even credit unions, you can use our cross-border platform in full white label. So you're literally just rebranding the page, putting your brand on it, and we do everything else. And on the other extreme, up to the biggest banks, we have full APIs where you can choose your own liquidity providers and choose your own FX and do it by currency and do it by different levels and have lots of different alternatives so that you can say, if you want it quickly, it's going to cost this much. And if you want it slowly, it's going to cost this, and complicated matrix of pricing. So from the very simplest solution all the way up to the most complicated, and we offer the full spectrum through our platform. And that way, you can toe dip and go and partner with us. And that's very, very easy and quick to do. And on the other extreme, you can do a full integration into what we're doing.
Interesting. I know some of the larger banks have initiated in the past decade, more so in the past decade, efforts to build, buy, or acquire. There's divisions of companies like Capital One, for example, where they look not only for products to potentially buy, but even those companies to acquire them, because in some cases they gain a competitive advantage. So taking them off the market and integrate them as their own is an advantage to them. So there's been a lot more of this with the larger institutions that can afford to buy out a competitive product in the marketplace. Doesn't help the end customers that much in terms of creating more competition, but it certainly helps them increase the value that they create for their customers. So in line of this thinking, buy versus build, is there opportunities even beyond what Nanopay is doing for technologies companies to realign with the smaller banks? Like, where are the gaps? What are the opportunities, in your opinion, that are being left unserved right now that could create a more competitive marketplace for the smaller bank, which essentially makes them go from smaller bank to mid-sized bank to potentially large banks if they can continue to compete? What's your thought process in that thinking of buy versus build?
Yeah, so from our perspective, and I'm sure this is true of many other of our other companies that are in similar space that's trying to provide really software solutions or full payment solutions in our case to financial services businesses. There's a broad spectrum of approaches that you can take, and a lot of businesses like us actually want to get bought by a big financial institution. That's not what we want, because remember, one of the things that we're trying to go after is we're trying to help the little guy that's an economic migrant on the other end of the world trying to send money home. And that might make us very wealthy, and then maybe we're going to use that money to go and do good things, but I'd rather just do good things through the business. It's a different point of view. We have investors that want to make money, so there's certainly a number at which I wouldn't be able to say no anymore. But right now, I've been able to hold them off and continue to invest in partnering with smaller financial institutions, and in the future, even with non-financial institutions, to be able to provide some of these embedded financial products. And so, from our perspective, I don't want to get bought by a big bank, but I'm happy to partner with anyone. But the whole point of what we're trying to do is level the playing field.
Right.
I think one of the things that happens right now in payments, and whether it's a domestic or a cross-border payment, is there are many, many, many mouths to feed. And that's because you've got so many processes and different components all being provided by different parties. And we just got to simplify all of that and get it down to a few core parties. And by doing that, we can give a much better rate and much lower fees to the end user. And indeed, we've done a deal in one market. I'm afraid I can't talk about it just yet, but soon we'll be able to talk about it, where we've agreed not to charge any fees and not to take any of the FX. We literally deliver US dollars to this foreign bank. And by doing that, they want to give the best rates to all their users because they want to maximize the US dollar take that they get, and they also want to make sure that they can offer the lowest rates possible, so that you'd have to be crazy to send money any other way. And we think that's super exciting because it's good for the small guy, and it's good for the receiving country as well, because their central bank's going to land up with US dollars rather than just all the FX.
I like the revenue share model because that's very sustainable and also gives you keeps you with sort of skin in the game to ensure that these companies continue to thrive. Do you think there's more companies that could do something similar to better serve as a marketplace? Because this happens a lot. Company goes into a marketplace, does a lot of good, then gets bought by a big giant and disappears, right? So, but is there a sustainable model where perhaps this revenue share could be something that other SaaS companies ought to be thinking about as a way to maintain that marketplace, stay true to that initiative? In your opinion, do you think that that's a trend that could continue in nowadays, or there's still very much more to focus of let's build it and get out? What are your thoughts on what's happening?
Yeah, so look, I do think it is very sustainable, and particularly in the payment space. So, a few things. The first thing is that the acquisition cost of a customer for small banks has gone up, but it's also gone up for fintechs. So if I'm going to create a new brand and go and compete with all the small banks and compete with all of the big banks to try and just take my slice of fintech, I'm going to have to pay more for every single customer than I had to last year or the year before or the year before. And there are a few things, and Apple's changes to privacy have driven up the costs of being able to narrow down and acquire your customers. And I think those things are going to carry on going up, and there's going to be more competition, and the big financial institutions are going to push back as well and take their fair share. So acquisition costs of clients is going to go up. And I think that's a very good reason for fintechs and SaaS companies to focus on aggregating their customer acquisition by partnering. And I think the best way to do that is through revenue share, because then you're in it together. So I think revenue share is very appealing from that perspective in terms of customer acquisition. And we're an unseen brand. We're in the background, right? Our actual end users don't get to see our brand ever. And that makes it very sustainable because we're not taking away their customers. We're not competing with them, right? We're actually partnering, and we're giving them new capabilities for the existing customers that they already have. So the acquisition costs or the cross-selling costs are dramatically lower than the acquisition costs of getting a new client. I think the last thing on this is, like we did in telecom, where we took a business that was transaction-based, where we got, we were selling minutes and we're selling bits and bytes in data, and we moved that to a monthly recurring revenue where we package it all together and we guarantee that we're going to get a certain amount. It's just magic. You take something that is, you got a revenue multiple of maybe 10x on the high end if you're growing a lot, and all of a sudden you made it 30 or 40 or 50 or even more. I mean, so if you can take those revenue models from, one-off revenue and transaction revenue, make it recurring, which you can do by partnering, which you can do by packaging things differently, which you can do through revenue share, it makes a more sustainable, but also a more valuable business.
And one might argue then that I guess the revenue sharing is actually the fair share that these large banks deserve. So let's talk about Nanopay. Obviously, fairness, equity are important to your company culture. It's what pushes you, what motivates you. What else? What is it like? What is your company culture like? And who are the people who choose to come work with you?
Yeah, you'd have to be crazy to come and work with us because, we're definitely not a corporate guys with a real structure. So we're kind of this eclectic group of people because on the one side, we are crazy strict about compliance and security and the way we build technology because we have to be. But as human beings, we are very laid back and relaxed, and we're not very formal. And everyone mucks in, and we are not interested in people that are not prepared to roll up their sleeves and do something out of their job description. Because hey, we're trying to fight and change something, and we want to make a big difference. So if you're not a mission-driven person that really cares about what we're doing and really cares about the way we do software, this is not the place for you. So we attract oddballs from all around the globe that are interested in this crazy eclectic mix of building, super secure, compliant software that's going to work all the time, and at the same time doing it in a fun-loving way where we just all have to muck in together and solve the problems. So it is.
So type A's with heart.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is funny, and we're very accommodating of what people want to do and how they want to do it, and we try to get the most out of everyone. And our real problems are like forcing people to take leave. And I was in a stand-up this morning, and one of my colleagues looked like she was quite suntanned, and so I pinged her and I said, "Where are you?" And she was in the Caribbean somewhere, and I'm like, "Well, if you're on vacation, what are you doing in stand-up?" And I had a meeting booked with her later in the day, and she's like, "Oh, I'm going to be online most of the day." I'm like, "No, take your vacation, stay away from online, do not come to any more meetings, And there's this person in the Caribbean and they're still online coming to all the meetings. Oh, I don't want anything to get delayed. I'm like, no, go away, enjoy your free time, right?
Kim, don't make fun of me.
This year, we had so many people that didn't take leave. We had to say, okay, we can carry over at least 5 days of leave into January, and we're still struggling to get them to take it. So
no, I mean, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful sentiment on both sides. I think that someone is happy and pleased and takes pride and importance in their work, and yet someone like the CEO says, "Would you stop it already?" Stop.
Yeah,
really,
I canceled my meeting. I canceled my meeting.
You can show up, but I won't be there.
Yeah, I'm not going to be there.
I'll take the time off for you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it sounds like you've got a great culture. Work hard, play hard, and be smart. It's a great place. Congratulations. Coming from larger organizations, highly regulated organization, you're still in a highly regulated business, which you're used to, right? But what's the journey been like as an entrepreneur, as building, a new business? What's that been like for you?
Yeah, it's been super interesting because I'm quite well known to all of the regulators and in many jurisdictions. And I'm always trying to push their boundaries and work with them rather than against them. And I was always the first to put up my hand and say, actually, we want to be regulated because we want to be able to give consumers and our partners, the understanding that what we're doing is we're walking in the front door. We're not trying to do anything gray. We're not trying to do anything dodgy. We're just trying to do it better. So we want to be regulated, and we want that check mark and that stamp of approval from a regulator. So kind of unusual in that way for a small business. And we've invested a lot of time in that. And so we have multiple people in different fora working with regulators all around the world to try and work with them and do it. And the funniest thing happened, I'm not going to say which regulator it was, but we were speaking to a bank regulator, And one of the things they finally said to us is, to be honest, we just don't understand payments. Can you guys give us a 101 on payments? And I'm like, absolutely, we're happy to do that. So it has been strange because we're small and edgy, and I think we're bleeding edge on the software. But we're very cautious in the markets that we work in. We're very cautious in the types of payments we do. We don't have any dodgy clients, and we really don't take any risk on that side. And at the same time, we're trying to work with some of the poorest markets, which there's a lot of abuse in. So it's an eclectic way of going to market where we're working closely with the regulators. Everyone else at the table are the big boys. So we always the small little guy going at the table.
Well, Laurence, it's been great to have you on the show. Thanks for sharing your journey with us. And it sounds like you have a great option for small banks to be able to buy a solution that they can integrate right away into enhancing the service they provide to their customers. So check it out, guys, and we will make sure we put your information on the landing page. Stay with us as we go off the air in just a minute. Kim, this is it for the week, right? And we've got the recap show on Monday at 12 o'clock Pacific. I want to recap. We have 2 shows this week or 3? 2 shows, 2. I think. 2. We had one where there was a last minute cancellation. So we'll recap the 2 shows we had this week. And then what do we got coming up next week? Kim,
next
do you have that list?
I do. Next week is a full house again, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, if we don't have any unforeseen cancellations. Please join us on Tuesday. We will be talking with, I believe, Anshu Sharma, who is the CEO of Skyflow. That will be followed by Wednesday with Shwish Goswami of TrueFan, and we have Michael Friedman of Super Frog. So the only one that I actually have a topic for right now is with Anshu, and that is what if privacy had an API? And that will be with Skyflow. So don't miss it next week, every day, 12 o'clock Pacific on Dojo Live. Have a good rest of your Thursday, Friday, and weekend. We'll see you on Monday.